Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar on maternity pay for Sage 50 Payroll. My name's Duncan, I'm your host and presenter, and we are joined today by my colleague Calvin, who's standing by in the background, ready to answer any questions. Let's now take a look at what we're going to cover in the webinar. So we'll begin with a brief introduction around SMP legislation, qualifying conditions, and a little bit about small employers relief, which may affect you when it comes to reclaim that payment. We're then going to give you a demonstration on recording maternity details. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this, and I'm going to show you both ways, including some of the advantages and disadvantages of each option. We're then going to come on to processing the payroll with SMP, explaining how to adjust your employees' payments and, where required, make adjustments to things like pension contributions. And then we'll move to the end of the tax month and we'll show you the process for reclaiming the statutory payment by submitting an EPS to HMRC. And then a little bonus at the end, we've got a troubleshooting section where we've pulled together some common questions, some common problems that can occur, and how you can avoid those problems and troubleshoot them yourself. And we will stick around following the end of the webinar, as I say, to continue answering questions for as long as we possibly can. So that's what we've got in store for you. Let's crack on with the introduction to statutory maternity pay. So SMP is an abbreviation for statutory maternity pay, and it's a payment made by employers to qualifying employees when they're taking time off work to have a baby. Now, the payment rate for statutory maternity pay is at two different rates. For the first 6 weeks of SMP is at the higher rate, which is the equivalent of 90% of your employee's average weekly earnings. And then for the remainder of the entitlement, 33 weeks is paid at the standard rate. Now for the current tax year, 2023 to 24, that's £172.48 per week, or it's 90% of average weekly earnings if this is lower. Now it's a statutory payment, so if the employee qualifies, you do need to pay it out. But the good news is you will be able to reclaim some, if not all, of this payment from HMRC. And we're going to cover that later on in the webinar. Now, let's take a quick look at the eligibility for your employees. So to be eligible for SMP, employees must be on your payroll in the qualifying week, the 15th week before the expected week of childbirth. They'll need to give you the correct notice. So they need to give you 28 days notice of when they want the SMP to start. They need to give you proof they're pregnant. That's usually the MAP-B1 certificate from midwife or doctor. And they need to have been continuously employed by you for at least 26 weeks up to any day in the qualifying week. Earnings must be at least £123 per week in the 8-week relevant period. And that period is also used to calculate the higher rate of maternity pay. So it'll be 90% of that weekly average. Now, I have just linked off to the gov.uk website if you want to read more about any of the eligibility or the notice periods, etc. But to summarise some of this information, I thought it would be useful just to run through some key SMP dates. So we're going to start at the due date. So the baby's due date is also known as the expected week of confinement, or EWC. And if we count back 15 weeks, that then takes us to the qualifying week. So 26 weeks before that is the latest start date for an employee to be eligible for the SMP. So in effect, they need to be employed for 41 weeks up to the due date. And then it's the 8-week period leading up to the qualifying week, which is used to calculate those average weekly earnings. A couple of other dates to be aware of. The earliest date that SMP can begin is 11 weeks before the due date. But the exception to that is if baby arrives before 11 weeks before the due date, in which case it will start from that point. And if your employee is off sick with a pregnancy-related sickness, if it gets to 4 weeks before the due date, at that point they will need to transfer to SMP if they've been previously receiving statutory sick pay. So those are your key dates laid out on a timeline for you. And before we go into the demos, I'm just going to mention at this point reclaiming the statutory payments. So any statutory parental payment is mostly funded by the government, and most employers can reclaim 92% of the statutory payment that they pay out. However, if you qualify for small employers relief, you can actually reclaim 103% of the amount paid out, so 100% of the statutory payment, and 3% known as NI compensation. Now, it's important to understand if you qualify for small employers relief, because this needs to be set up in your program before you process the statutory payment. And you would usually qualify for this if your total national insurance contributions, so that's employee plus employer contributions, were £45,000 or less in the tax year before the employee's qualifying or matching week in the case of adoption. So I just want to show you where that setting is in your program, and I'll share a tip on how to find the total Class 1 national insurance for a previous tax year. So if I just bring the slides down for a moment, we'll look at the report first. So I want to check if I qualify for small employers relief. And let's assume that the tax year I want to check is the tax year ending the 5th of April, 2023. So first of all, I'm just going to change my process date back to the 5th of April, 2023. And then I can just run the P32 report for the full year. So I can do that from reports in the period end folder. It's this one here, form P32. We're going to run it for the full year. So from month 1 to month 12 of the previous tax year. And then you would check your gross national insurance figure. So in this case, it's below that £45,000 threshold. So that indicates that this company, in my demo, does qualify for the small employers relief. So once you've checked that, you can set your process date back to your next pay date. And if you then go into your company settings, so from the company tasks, I'll click onto settings. There's a checkbox over here on the right-hand side on the details tab to indicate if you are eligible for that small employers relief. So it's something we recommend that you check at the start of each tax year, but if you're coming up to process a statutory payment, it's worth checking this setting first, and that way you can be sure that you are reclaiming the appropriate amount. And obviously, if you're not entitled to small employers relief, you would just check that this box has been cleared. So we're going to look at reclaiming a little bit later in the webinar as well, but it's worth mentioning up front to check that setting, as you need that in place really before you process the statutory payment. So next up, we're going to look at recording the maternity details. And once all of this information is entered into your program, the statutory payment itself calculates automatically, and it will continue until the full 39 weeks has been paid, or you reach the employee's return to work date if that is sooner. So in order to record the details, there's a bit of information you'll need. So first of all, you need to know the date that the employee will be starting their SMP, or their maternity leave. So they should be informing you of that with at least 28 days notice. And you will also need the medical evidence, which will include confirmation of the baby's due date or expected week of confinement. So date they want to start and the date the baby is due. And once you've got that information, it's really simple to enter into your software, as we'll show you in this next demo. So there are two ways you can do this. I'm going to show you my preferred method first, and then we'll look at the alternative. So I'm just going to return to the employee tasks for this part of the demo. And I'm going to start by selecting the employee who's going on maternity leave. Now, for fairly obvious reasons, it needs to be a female employee to have a baby. So I've selected a female, and in the employee tasks, you'll see there are various options that activate when you select an employee, and the one we're going to choose here is recording maternity. So this then takes us into the quick SMP screen, and this is a screen where you can enter all of the information that's required to set up the statutory payment. Now, first of all, you select a box to confirm you've received the medical evidence. So I've had the MAP B1 form, and then from that evidence, you would enter the baby's expected date of birth, which in this case is the 23rd of June. You would then click Check Entitlement, and payroll will run some checks in the background, ensuring that the qualifying conditions have been met. And hopefully you'll see the 3 ticks here on the right-hand side confirming that. And then all you need to do is to enter the employee's last day of work. So the last day they've worked, or if they've been on holiday before they start their SMP, their last day of holiday. And then the SMP payment will begin the following day. So for this particular employee, they will be working up to the 9th of June. That'll be their last day of work, and therefore their maternity leave, their SMP, will begin on the 10th. So I'll record the 9th as the last day of work. And as soon as that's been entered, you'll see that in the bottom right-hand corner, it's now displaying an entitlement to the statutory payment. So it's showing us 6 weeks at the higher rate. So this figure here is 90% of the employee's average weekly earnings. And then we have 33 weeks at the standard rate, which in this case is the £172.48 per week. Now there's some additional information you can record. The actual date of birth can be recorded once known. If you already know the employee's return to work date, that can also be entered, but can be left blank at this stage, and you'll still be able to calculate the statutory payment. And you'll actually see a list of key dates here on the right-hand side. So that qualifying week, 15th week before the baby's due, in this case was the 5th of March. They need to have been employed no later than the 17th of September to qualify. This is where the average was taken in the set period. And then we've got the 11 weeks before, the 4 weeks before, employee's last day of work. And if they take the full entitlement, this will be the last day of their maternity pay period. So that's all pretty useful information. And if you want to save a copy of that, you can actually print a report summarizing these details. So that'll actually go straight to your printer. You don't get a preview first, but you can print it out, or I've printed it using Microsoft Printer PDF. And then you'll get a report looking something like this, showing the qualifying conditions, average earnings, all of those key dates, and then the statutory entitlement. So you might find that quite useful for your records, or even to provide a copy to your employee. So if you're happy with everything entered, you can click on to Save. If for any reason you need to overwrite the calculated average earnings, there is an option to do this by clicking Earnings During Set Period. So this can be overtyped if required. And then the special circumstances that may affect maternity leave include weeks on a trade dispute, if they've been on strike, if they've started the maternity pay period early due to sickness, so they've transferred at that 4-week limit, or if they started before the 11 weeks before the baby was due, as the baby has been born before that date. So you don't often need to use special circumstances. That's where you would find them if required. So I'm just going to go ahead and save the details and then click on to Close. And that has now recorded all of the maternity details needed to calculate the maternity pay. So you'll find that option from the employee tasks. It's also available in the employee links. So sorry, the payroll links. So if you're on the payroll toolbar, recording maternity is available here as well. Now, the alternative to using the quick link is to enter the information directly in the employee record. So some of you have probably done this before. So within the employee record, you can go to the Absence tab. You can then click SMP at the bottom of the absence diary, and then you can enter the required information across these tabs. So this is pulled through from the quick SMP screen already. So I've got my due date, I've got the last day at work, the average weekly gross pay. I don't need to auto-calc it because it's already there. But if you were entering the information directly in the record, you'll need to click auto-calc to generate this figure. And the box for the medical evidence has also been selected. This tab is where you can check the average earnings and how that's been calculated. So it's been based off 2 monthly payments in my case to come out with a weekly average. And then the entitlement tab confirms the start of maternity pay period, the 10th of June in this case. Anything that was previously paid, which should always show 0 at the start of the maternity leave, but if it doesn't, it's usually because there's been a previous child, and we'll come on to that later. The currently due entitlement, so 3 weeks between this date and our process date, 30th of June, and then the full entitlement displayed here at the bottom of the screen. So you could enter the information in this area if you prefer to, but if you want that report, you would do it through Recording Maternity. So that is everything set up. We're just going to have a quick look in the Enter Payment screen, just so I can show you the statutory maternity pay itself. So I've already set my process date to my pay date, the 30th of June. My employees are paid on the last day of the month. I'm going to open the Enter Payment screen, just with this employee selected. And if I click straight to the summary screen, this is where I'll find the statutory maternity pay. So this is 3 weeks worth at the higher rate. If I'm in Enter Payments and I want to see a breakdown of this amount, you can select it and you can click the drop down, and that jumps you straight to the SMP details in the employee record. And then we can check entitlement information from the tab at the top. So that will continue to calculate automatically throughout the maternity leave until either the return to work date is reached or the full 39-week entitlement is paid. But what we will need to do, and I'm going to come on to this in a moment, is make some adjustments to our other payments. So for now, I'm going to close out of Enter Payments, and we'll give you a recap of the steps so far. So information you need is when the employee wants to start their maternity leave, because you'll need to enter their last day of work and the baby's due date. Recording it, I would recommend that you use the quick SMP screen from the Recording Maternity link to take the information from the MAP-B1 form, pop it in here, and then print out the report if you wish to keep a copy of all those key dates. And then we can go into the Enter Payment screen, and this is where you can view the statutory maternity pay. And if you want to see that breakdown, the number of weeks currently due, you can always click on it and click the drop down arrow. You can then select the entitlement tab and you can see how it's been broken down. In this case, it's 3 weeks and it's at that higher rate. So that's the setup, pretty much done. But what we're going to talk about next is adjusting your employees' payments. Now, as it stands, in my payroll, the employee is getting their statutory maternity pay and we still have their full salary entered. So at the moment, they're getting paid full wage plus their SMP. Now, you'll need to check what your employee's contract of employment says, because some employees will have an entitlement to your own company sick pay scheme, sometimes known as maternity pay, I should say, company maternity pay, sometimes known as occupational maternity pay or enhanced maternity pay, in which case you would be paying them above and beyond the statutory pay amount. Or you might not have such a scheme, so you would want to adjust the pay so the employee only receives payment for what they've worked, plus the SMP that they're entitled to for that period. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways of adjusting the employee's payments. So we're going to look at the Make Up Basic option, and we will also look at manually adjusting the pay. So we'll just return to the demo. I've still got that same employee highlighted, and we'll go back into the Enter Payment screen. So we've already seen on the Summary tab is where you'll find the statutory maternity pay. And we're going to look first at the Make Up Basic option. So this would be used if there's a specific amount you want the employee to receive. So in this case, I want them to get their full £2,000 salary, because we're going to top up the SMP with effectively company maternity pay, or we're making up to their basic. Now, as it stands at the moment, we've got the full salary entered. So this is the amount ultimately we want them to receive. And then if I go to the Summary tab, I can then click Make Up Basic here at the bottom. and you'll be prompted to make an adjustment to one of the pay elements. So it'll tell you which pay element it's trying to adjust. In this case, it's salary. And if that is the payment we want to adjust, we would simply click yes to continue. So yes, I do want to reduce the salary. You can see that's automatically reduced to the difference between the original salary and the statutory maternity pay amount. And the way that it's done that is it's done an adjustment to the hours value, which has in turn reduced the amount. And for next month, if I wanted to do the same thing, if they're still getting full pay, all I would need to do is to start by entering the full amount I want them to receive, returning to the summary tab and then clicking make up to basic. And that will then make up based on whatever next month's maternity pay will be, because it will have dropped down to the standard rate by that point, or some of the payment would at least. So that's making up to basic, and that's just one of the ways you could pay them their full pay. If you don't have an arrangement to make up to basic, so if there's no company maternity scheme and you only want to pay them for the time that they've worked this period, you will need to do a manual adjustment to their salary. So you can calculate this in a similar way that you'd calculate a final salary for a leaver or the first salary for someone that starts midway through a period. So the way that I'm going to do it is I'm still going to do an adjustment to the hours or number value, but I've just counted up that the employee will have worked for 7 days out of a possible 22 in June, because they're working 5 days a week. So to pay them for them 7 days, I've decided to reduce their hours to 7 divided by 22, which has then reduced the amount. Now, you may well have a different way of calculating a part period salary, so do check your own company policy on doing this. But where you don't have a company maternity scheme, you would work out what you want to pay them for the time they've worked, and then you would enter that. And next month, if they're only getting statutory pay, I would simply reduce the salary to 0. So that's adjusting the payments. The other thing I wanted to mention at this point, and we did have a question submitted about this before the webinar, was what you might need to do in terms of adjusting pension contributions. So for most pension schemes, and this is something you should check with your pension provider if at all you are unsure, the employer would need to maintain their pension contribution at the same level they were paying when the employee was on normal pay. So particularly where there isn't a company scheme in place, you may need to override the calculated pension contribution, which is usually set up as a percentage, so that you continue to contribute the correct amount into the employee's pension. Now, their own pension contribution is usually based on what they're earning, so that could reduce if they're getting reduced pay because they're on SMP only. But it's the employer contribution most commonly that will need to be set to a fixed amount. So I just want to show you how you can achieve that. So we're actually going to jump into the employee record, which you can do directly from Enter Payments by clicking on this employee button. I'm going to go to the pension information, where I can manage my pension scheme. I can then edit the scheme, like so. And currently, this employee has a percentage contribution. So they're putting in 5% of their qualifying earnings. The employer is putting in 3%. What I want to do is I want to set the employer contribution to what we normally pay as a fixed amount. So I've looked back at my reports. We normally pay £44.40 for this particular employee. So we're temporarily amending the employer contribution. And now that we've done that, if I check the summary, this is the employee's contribution. So this will be slightly reduced because they're not getting their full wage. But the employer contribution, we can see, is the amount, the fixed amount that we have entered. So that's the easiest way to make an adjustment if you've got a percentage-based scheme, which most of them are, and you need to maintain the original level of employer pension contribution. So once you are happy with all of the payments you've entered, you can then print your pay slips and pre-update reports. So we will take a quick look at the payslip. If I go into the pre-update reports option. So this is one of our standard payslips that I've just saved to my favorites. And you can see here, if I just zoom in slightly for you, we've got the adjusted salary. So I did this adjustment myself to pay them for what they worked this month. And then we've got the parental pay itemized separately. So this is the statutory payment being paid up to the process date. And then we've got the usual deductions for tax, national insurance, got the calculated pension for the employee, and that fixed pension that we've just overridden for the employer. So that's how it appears on the payslip. And then you will also see statutory payment information on payment summary part 1 if you run this report. So there is a column. It's just showing this one employee because that's the only one I've got highlighted, but parental payments, as you can see, has its own column here. So what we'll actually do is we'll just complete payroll for everyone for this month. Just going to update the records. And then you would submit your FPS in the usual way, full payment submission. But when you do this, it's not actually going to submit anything about the amounts you are reclaiming. So this is simply the liability based on all the taxable payments that you've made. And that gets submitted in the usual way. But because we're reclaiming a statutory payment, what we're going to do later on is submit an EPS at the end of the month. And that will allow us to adjust the liability by reporting the amount that has been reclaimed. So that's the payroll complete. Let's just pause and recap some of that information for you. So we started by looking at Make Up Basic. So if you've got a company scheme, this is one way you can ensure the employee gets paid their full salary by entering the full salary first. Come into the Summary tab and clicking Make Up Basic. When it shows you the payment that you want to reduce, click Yes. And then it will automatically reduce it down to whatever the full salary amount was. So in our case, it reduced that £2,000 salary to be the difference between £2,000 and the statutory maternity pay. The other way of doing it, which I showed you second, was adjusting the payments manually. So often you would do this for the first SMP payment if they've started their leave midway through the month. And then you would reduce it down to 0 if they're only getting SMP for the future periods. And finally, those pension adjustments, employer pension contributions are usually based on the employee's normal pay during maternity leave, certainly for the first 26 weeks. You can enter a fixed amount contribution to override that calculated percentage, but do check with your pension provider or HMRC if you require any clarification on these rules. So we've talked about reclaiming statutory payments, and this is something that happens at the end of the month. So if you're running a weekly, fortnightly, or 4-weekly payroll, you wouldn't actually do this step until you've completed all pay dates within the tax month. But when it comes to the end of the month, you'll be reclaiming the statutory pay by offsetting it against the PAYE and national insurance you've deducted from your employees. So on the P32 report, it'll show as SMP recovered, and if applicable, the NI compensation if you qualify for the small employers relief. And because you're making a reduced payment compared to what was submitted in the FPS, you do need to then send an EPS, an employer payment summary, at the end of the month, which will send over all of the statutory reclaim figures for the tax year to date. So we'll take a look at this process now. So you saw that I finished my monthly payroll. I submitted the FPS. So I don't have any other pay dates within this tax period. So my next step is going to be to run my P32 report. So you can either run that from the reports option. It's in the period end folder, and I've added it to my favorites. It's also in the quick links, the payroll links. You can run your P32 from there. This one is for tax month 3. It's the June tax month. And this is the report preview. And you can see it's totaled up all of the PAYE tax, national insurance. We've then got some employment allowance we're claiming this month, and in boxes 6 and 7, we've got our SMP recovered, so 100% of the SMP paid, and then as a small employer, we've got the 3% NI compensation. Now, if you don't qualify for small employers relief, you'll only see a reclaim amount in box 6, and it will be 92% of the amount that you paid out. So you get most of it back, but if you're a small employer, you get all of it and a little bit of compensation. So that in turn has reduced the amount we're going to pay for this month. So just under 2,500, which was less than what it showed in the FPS that we just submitted. And for that reason, we do need to send an EPS to HMRC. So that's my P32 report. I could export that or print a copy for my records. And what we would then do, and you would need to do this towards the end of the tax month. So you need to wait until after the 19th of the month to send an EPS. So you do this from the e-submissions tasks, and you would click onto employer payment summary. So I am doing this early because we're running the webinar early in the month, but usually this would be done, as I say, after the 19th and before the 19th of the following calendar month. So it takes you into this wizard, and you need to select the option you're adjusting your payment, because in this case we've recovered statutory pay. It'll display the tax month, and it will then show the values recovered for the tax year. So this is a cumulative amount, so we'll keep going up throughout the tax year as you reclaim more and more. You've got your CIS deduction suffered if applicable, and apprenticeship levy values. And then you complete the EPS wizard. You can ignore that little warning. You won't get that, it's just because I'm in the training room, and that then takes you into the EPS submission. So it's just a case of checking the details, make sure you're happy with the tax year, etc. You click on to submit, and that is then sent to HMRC. So they now know how much that we've reclaimed, so they can then adjust the amount payable in our PAYE online account. So that's it done. We've reclaimed the statutory pay, and then we do it all again next month. So when we set our next process date, it's already set up for that existing employee. So if I go into enter payments, you can see on the summary tab, we've got our statutory maternity pay. We can continue making up to basic if that's what we want to do. Put the full pay in and make up basic. You can see it's readjusted it based on this month's pay. Or if we don't have that company scheme, at this point, we won't be paying them salary. We would only be paying them their statutory maternity. So that's the end of the month, and that is the end of the general processing. So I did say we've got a little bonus section for you. So we've put together some troubleshooting tips on SMP. So hopefully this may answer some of the questions that have come in, but we'll run through some of these now. And one of the most common problems that people run into when processing statutory payments happens if an employee has been off and had a baby before, because there is certain information that gets stored in your program, which will prevent it from calculating a second time. So there's some really easy fixes to this, and there's a good way of avoiding it in the first place as well. But I'm going to show you a demo of this problem, so to speak, and I'll show you a couple of ways of fixing it. So I've got an employee who has been on maternity leave before. It was actually a few years ago. It's this employee here that I've highlighted. And if I go directly into their record and onto the absence tab and down to SMP, we could actually see we've got the previous maternity dates in place. And on the entitlement tab, we have 39 weeks previously paid. Now you'll see that you can't remove that figure from here. And you might think just by replacing all of the dates with the dates for the current baby, you'd be able to pay the next lot of maternity pay. But the problem you come across is that it doesn't calculate. So let's just pop some dates in for the current month. Recalculate the average pay. So we've changed the dates there, but when we go into enter payments, we'll see that there's no maternity pay calculating. And if we try to drill down into that and check the entitlement, we still have those 39 weeks previously paid. So one solution is to go into the employee record, go to the employment tab, and then YTD values. Go onto the statutory payments tab, and then in the weeks paid section, just manually change that figure to 0. And that will get you around the problem. That's certainly a reasonable workaround to this. But there is a way that you could really avoid that happening, and that would be to record the maternity details using the recording maternity link. Now, you do have to be a little bit careful with this. When you click record in maternity and there are already maternity details entered, it's already been paid, you will see this message. So you've already paid it to the employee. Do you want to record details for a second child? Now, if you know that at this point you are setting it up for someone starting their maternity leave, you would just go ahead and click yes. And that actually clears down the previous paid 39 weeks. If you're at all unsure, just click no, and that will show you the information entered. And this would actually show me the old dates if I hadn't been in and changed them. But if I click yes, it clears everything down. And then I can then put the information back in. So the exact same dates that I put in before. I can save and close this screen. And then in enter payments, you can see it has now calculated the maternity pay. So by doing that, it has automatically cleared out the weeks paid that was stored in the year to dates. And the reason I say be careful is, remember, we've got employee 1 set up as well. This will be the second month of maternity pay. And if we go back in to view their details, it's asking me, do I want to set it up for a second child? No, I don't for this one. I just want to view the details. So get into the habit of clicking no to that, just to be on the safe side. But if you're setting it up for a new employee and they've had it before, you can click yes, and that clears everything down. So really common one, that one, for employees that have had the payment before. So that's one of the reasons where no SMP would be calculating. So hasn't been paid for a previous child. Solution, use Quick SMP to clear the information or clear it manually from the year-to-date values. Other reasons it may not calculate are if average earnings are too low. So if you go into that Quick SMP screen, it will display the average earnings for you. You'll be able to check the earnings during set period, or you could check them as well in the employee record. If it's below £123, it means they do not qualify for the payment. So you need to give them a SMP1 form. And they can go ahead and claim maternity allowance. And a third reason is there may be the manual statutory pay calculations box ticked. Just show you where that is. So I've got an employee here. If I go to absence and SMP, we've got this box ticked at the bottom. Now, if you have that ticked, whatever information you entered here is for reference only. It won't calculate the SMP for you. It relies on you entering SMP manually in the enter payment screen. And there are valid use cases for doing it manually. For example, if you've moved to Sage in the middle of someone's maternity leave. However, if that's been ticked by accident and you wanted it to calculate automatically, you can either untick it from there, or if you use this quick link, it'll then tell you that you've got the manual box ticked and do you want to clear it? And I can click yes. I can then go ahead and enter the details. So a few good reasons to use the quick entry screen. rather than putting the details directly in the record. A couple of others for you in the couple of minutes we've got left. So if you find that the SMP amount is different to what you're expecting, usually less, there's a couple of common reasons for this. So the way that statutory payments are calculated in the programme is up to your process date. So if, for example, you pay your employees on the 25th of the month, and usually you pay them for the work they did to the end of the month, SMP will work slightly differently. So their first payment would only calculate the SMP up to the pay date, the 25th. So it might be less than you'd usually expect. But on the flip side, at the end of the maternity leave, their last payment will therefore be higher than what you'd expect if the dates were aligned to the calendar month. So first of all, check that you have entered the correct process date matching the employee's pay date, and just be aware that the statutory pay is calculated up to that date, not up to any other date in the period. And if the amount that you're querying is specifically on the standard rate of SMP, if you're expecting it to be 172.48 per week and perhaps it's less, the reason for that is that the SMP standard rate is the lower of 90% of average earnings or 172.48. So if your 90% AWE is below that standard rate, they will continue to get the 90% amount throughout the maternity. So it wouldn't change between higher and standard rate, it would just remain at that lower amount. So that's about it from me, but I'm going to run through some further support, and we will try to stick around in case there are extra questions that are coming in that we could answer. I want to run through some further support for you. So there's a really useful website to make a note of, sage.co.uk/help. Here's a direct link to our help centre. You can also get to all of our help content within the programme by pressing the F1 key on your keyboard, which will bring up the contextual help for the area that you are working in. So you get help feature. But from any browser, sage.co.uk/help, follow the links to Sage 50 Payroll, and that is your one-stop shop for all of our support. So you can search the knowledge base, read our support guides, you can see other webinars coming up, various videos you can watch, and you can get in touch with the support team, finding all the contact details from there. For new users and seasoned payroll users as well, we have access to Sage University at sageu.com. All of our courses for payroll are free to use, so you can do our e-learning courses, you can do the online certification, you can dip in and out of our bite-size learning. So just create your profile at sageu.com and then get stuck in to all of that free training. So that does take us to 45 minutes, which was our scheduled time for the webinar, but we will stick around a little while longer just to give you that chance to send through any final questions and also to download the handouts if you haven't already done so. If you are done and you're leaving right now, I just want to thank you for your time today. You will see when you click exit, a survey pops up asking for your feedback. So I'd really appreciate you just spending a moment to enter any comments that you may have and to just complete that feedback survey, as we do read them all and it helps us to improve these sessions moving forward. As well as that, you'll get a follow-up email. So that contains a link to the recording for today's webinar and also links to sign up for future sessions. So I am going to go on mute briefly just to have a look at some of the questions, make sure we've covered most of them off. But I will be back with you in a few minutes when we're ready to close the session down. So I shall speak to you in a bit. Hello again, everyone, and thanks for sticking with us there. So plenty of questions came through today, so I hope that we've been able to answer most of them for you. And thank you very much for sending them through. Just a reminder that you will see a short exit survey when you exit the webinar. If you wouldn't mind completing that for us, that would be really much appreciated. And do look out for your follow-up email arriving later today with links to register for our future sessions, including paternity pay and shared parental pay happening next week, and also links to watch all of our webinar recordings. As we seem to have answered most of the questions and we are over our time, we are going to call it a day there. So thanks once again for joining us. On behalf of myself and Calvin, enjoy the rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing you on some other webinars in the near future. Goodbye for now.